In the crumbling ruins of a war-torn German city, a lone Marine sniper was about to face the deadliest shot of his life. What started as a mission to eliminate an enemy threat took a shocking turn when he realized the German sniper had him in his sights first. Staff Sergeant Jack Whitaker wasn't your typical soldier. For years he had honed his skills as a top Marine marksman, known for his lethal precision and ability to turn the tide of battle with a single well-placed shot. When he encountered the enemy sniper, a ghost-like killer whose shots had already claimed the lives of his fellow Marines, he had no idea he was walking into the most dangerous duel of his career. Jack made a choice in that moment that would lead to an unexpected reckoning. What began as a mission of survival would become a test of skill, willpower, and something far more profound. The battlefield, and Jack's understanding of war, would never be the same after he pulled the trigger. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Staff Sergeant Jack Whitaker breathed in the acrid smell of burning stone and metal as he made his way through the shattered remains of what had once been a proud German city. The late April air carried a bitter chill, but it wasn't the cold that made his fingers tighten around his M1903A4 Springfield rifle. Something about this mission felt different. Wrong, maybe. Though he'd never admit it out loud, the emptiness beside him where Lou should have been felt like a physical wound. Lieutenant Carter's words from their earlier briefing still echoed in his mind. "This sniper's been picking off our men for days. 3 confirmed kills yesterday alone. Command wants him eliminated before we push forward." Carter had fixed Jack with that hard stare of his, the one that said failure wasn't an option. "You're the best we've got, Whitaker. Get it done." Jack moved like a ghost through the rubble-strewn streets, his boots barely making a sound on the broken cobblestones. The city was a graveyard of fractured buildings and twisted metal, the kind of urban wasteland that every sniper dreamed of, or had nightmares about depending on which end of the scope you were on. His destination loomed ahead, a half-destroyed church, its bell tower still reaching defiantly toward the ash-gray sky. "Nice spot," Lou's voice whispered in his head, as clear as if his spotter was still alive and crouching beside him. "Good. Elevation, multiple escape routes. Bet you $10 Jerry's already thought of it, though." Jack pushed the voice away but couldn't shake the truth in those phantom words. The tower was an obvious choice. Maybe too obvious. But sometimes, the best hiding spot was the one everyone expected you to avoid. He began his careful ascent, testing each step on the crumbling stone staircase. The higher he climbed, the more exposed he felt, even though he knew his movements were hidden from outside view. The bell tower's upper level was a mess of fallen masonry and splintered wooden beams. The great bell itself had crashed through the floor during some long-ago bombing, leaving a jagged hole that offered a perfect shooting position. Jack set up his rifle with practiced efficiency, each movement automatic after countless similar deployments. But his hands weren't quite steady, and he knew why. This was his first mission without Lou, his first time being both shooter and spotter. The thought made his throat tighten. Lou had died because Jack hadn't seen the enemy sniper in time, hadn't noticed the subtle signs that would have warned them they were being hunted. He wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Through his scope, the ruined city spread out before him like a 3-dimensional chessboard. Building heights, angles, distances, his mind calculated them all automatically. Where would I set up if I were him? The question played on repeat as he scanned methodically, searching for the telltale signs of another sniper's nest. A flash of reflected light caught his eye, there and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. But Jack knew better. That momentary glint came from another scope, one that was almost certainly trained on his position right now. His pulse quickened, but his breathing remained steady. This was the game, patient, lethal, and unforgiving. "You've got company, Jackie," Lou's voice came again, using that old nickname that had always irritated him. "This one's different. Can feel it in my bones." Jack adjusted his scope slightly, focusing on the area where he'd seen the flash. The ruins offered too many perfect hiding spots, too many shadows where a skilled marksman could disappear. But Something about the precision of that reflected light, the deliberate way it had revealed itself and vanished. This wasn't just any German sniper. In the crumbling ruins of a war-torn German city, a lone Marine sniper was about to face the deadliest shot of his life. What started as a mission to eliminate an enemy threat took a shocking turn when he realized the German sniper had him in his sights first. Staff Sergeant Jack Whitaker wasn't your typical soldier. For years he had honed his skills as a top Marine marksman, known for his lethal precision and ability to turn the tide of battle with a single well-placed shot. When he encountered the enemy sniper, a ghost-like killer whose shots had already claimed the lives of his fellow Marines, he had no idea he was walking into the most dangerous duel of his career. Jack made a choice in that moment that would lead to an unexpected reckoning. What began as a mission of survival would become a test of skill, willpower, and something far more profound. The battlefield, and Jack's understanding of war, would never be the same after he pulled the trigger. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Staff Sergeant Jack Whitaker breathed in the acrid smell of burning stone and metal as he made his way through the shattered remains of what had once been a proud German city. The late April air carried a bitter chill, but it wasn't the cold that made his fingers tighten around his M1903A4 Springfield rifle. Something about this mission felt different. Wrong, maybe. Though he'd never admit it out loud, the emptiness beside him where Lou should have been felt like a physical wound. Lieutenant Carter's words from their earlier briefing still echoed in his mind. This sniper's been picking off our men for days. 3 confirmed kills yesterday alone. Command wants him eliminated before we push forward. Carter had fixed Jack with that hard stare of his, the one that said failure wasn't an option. You're the best we've got, Whitaker. Get it done. Jack moved like a ghost through the rubble-strewn streets, his boots barely making a sound on the broken cobblestones. The city was a graveyard of fractured buildings and twisted metal, the kind of urban wasteland that every sniper dreamed of, or had nightmares about depending on which end of the scope you were on. His destination loomed ahead, a half-destroyed church, its bell tower still reaching defiantly toward the ash-gray sky. Nice spot, Lou's voice whispered in his head, as clear as if his spotter was still alive and crouching beside him. Good. Elevation, multiple escape routes. Bet you $10 Jerry's already thought of it, though. Jack pushed the voice away but couldn't shake the truth in those phantom words. The tower was an obvious choice. Maybe too obvious. But sometimes, the best hiding spot was the one everyone expected you to avoid. He began his careful ascent, testing each step on the crumbling stone staircase. The higher he climbed, the more exposed he felt, even though he knew his movements were hidden from outside view. The bell tower's upper level was a mess of fallen masonry and splintered wooden beams. The great bell itself had crashed through the floor during some long-ago bombing, leaving a jagged hole that offered a perfect shooting position. Jack set up his rifle with practiced efficiency, each movement automatic after countless similar deployments. But his hands weren't quite steady, and he knew why. This was his first mission without Lou, his first time being both shooter and spotter. The thought made his throat tighten. Lou had died because Jack hadn't seen the enemy sniper in time, hadn't noticed the subtle signs that would have warned them they were being hunted. He wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Through his scope, the ruined city spread out before him like a 3-dimensional chessboard. Building heights, angles, distances, his mind calculated them all automatically. Where would I set up if I were him? The question played on repeat as he scanned methodically, searching for the telltale signs of another sniper's nest. A flash of reflected light caught his eye, there and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. But Jack knew better. That momentary glint came from another scope, one that was almost certainly trained on his position right now. His pulse quickened, but his breathing remained steady. This was the game, patient, lethal, and unforgiving. "You've got company, Jackie," Lou's voice came again, using that old nickname that had always irritated him. "This one's different. Can feel it in my bones." Jack adjusted his scope slightly, focusing on the area where he'd seen the flash. The ruins offered too many perfect hiding spots, too many shadows where a skilled marksman could disappear. But something about the precision of that reflected light, the deliberate way it had revealed itself and vanished. This wasn't just any German sniper. The response was immediate, a shot that shattered the mirror in his hand. But Jack was already moving, sliding down through the hole where the bell had fallen. He'd expected the shot, counted on it. Because for that single instant, his opponent had been forced to reveal his true position to take it. "Not bad, Jackie," Lou's voice chuckled. "But you know what the real question is, don't you?" Jack did know. Because in that brief moment when he'd spotted the German's muzzle flash, he'd seen something else. Something that didn't make sense. The sniper had been standing in plain view, silhouetted against the sky. Almost as if he wanted you to see him. Jack finished the thought. He reached the ground floor of the church, every nerve tingling with awareness. This wasn't just a duel anymore. It was a conversation, and his opponent had just made the opening statement. Now it was Jack's turn to reply, but as he slipped into the gathering shadows of the ruined city, one thought kept nagging at him. In all his years of combat, he'd never met another sniper who thought exactly like him. Until now. The game was just beginning, and Jack had the unsettling feeling that his opponent had already planned out every move. The ruins whispered with the voices of the dead as Jack moved through the shadowed streets. Every window, every broken doorway could hide his opponent's scope. But something told him the German wouldn't take such an obvious shot. No, this ghost he was hunting, or was being hunted by, played by different rules. "Remember that sniper in Caen?" Lou's voice drifted through his memory. How he kept switching positions, never where you expected, Jack remembered. They'd spent 3 days tracking that one, only to find he'd been dead the whole time, victim of an artillery strike. But this was different. This sniper was very much alive, and he was teaching Jack things about their craft that he'd never even considered. Jack paused in the shelter of a collapsed wall, carefully removing his helmet. The old trick might be obvious, but sometimes the classics worked because everyone thought they were too obvious to try. He took his time, lashing the helmet to a broken piece of rebar with strips torn from his field dressing. The whole thing took less than 2 minutes, an eternity when you knew someone was watching. "You really think he'll fall for this?" Lou's voice held that familiar skeptical tone. "Guy who can practically read your mind?" "No," Jack whispered. "I think he'll do exactly what I would do." He positioned the helmet carefully, making sure its angle would be visible from his enemy's last known position. Then he waited, scope, trained not on the buildings ahead, but on the ones to his left. If he was right, the shot came from behind him. Jack didn't move, didn't even flinch as the bullet screamed past his position and punched through his helmet, spinning it on its metal post. The sound of the shot rolled across the ruins like distant thunder, but it was the meaning behind it that made Jack's skin crawl. His opponent hadn't just avoided the trap, he'd circled entirely around Jack's position in the time it had taken to set up the decoy. That kind of movement through urban terrain, maintaining stealth while covering that much ground. It should have been impossible. "Got to admire the artistry," Lou's voice mused. "He's not just showing you he can't be fooled. He's showing you why." Jack studied the helmet, now gently swaying on its post. The bullet hole was dead center, exactly where it would have killed him. A warning, a message, or something else entirely. The precision spoke of years of training, countless hours spent perfecting every aspect of the craft. This wasn't some Wehrmacht conscript who'd shown talent with a rifle. This was someone who had devoted his life to the art of death. As if confirming his thoughts, another shot rang out, this one from a completely different position, high and to the right. The bullet struck the ground at Jack's feet, kicking up a small cloud of dust. The message was clear. "I can hit you anytime I want." "He's playing with you," Lou's voice warned. "Question is, why? What's he waiting for?" Jack knew, because he would have done the same thing. When you encountered an equal, someone who understood the dance of death as intimately as you did, You didn't just kill them. You studied them, learned from them, and maybe, if you were honest with yourself, you savored the rare moment of finding someone who truly understood. The sun was sinking faster now, painting the ruins in deepening shades of purple and gray. Soon the real game would begin. Night shooting was an art few snipers ever mastered. It required an almost supernatural ability to read terrain, calculate distances in near total darkness, and predict your target's movements based on the faintest of sounds. Jack retrieved his helmet, noting the perfect placement of the bullet hole. This was about something deeper, more personal. A test of will between two men who had turned death into an art form. "You're more alike than different," Lou's voice finally returned, thoughtful now. "That's what's really keeping you both alive. You recognize yourself in him." Jack didn't respond, but the truth of it settled in his chest like a cold weight. Every move his opponent made was a mirror of what Jack himself would have done. Every pause, every careful sound, spoke of a mind that worked exactly like his own. It was like playing chess against yourself. Fascinating, but ultimately unwinnable. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, a faint gray smudge against the black. Soon dawn would bring a new phase of their deadly game. Jack's eyes burned with exhaustion, but sleep wasn't an option. His opponent wouldn't rest, so neither could he. This was as much a test of endurance as it was of skill. Who would make the first mistake? Who would let fatigue cloud their judgment at that crucial moment? A sudden, sharp crack, the sound of a boot finding loose stone, made Jack's heart jump. His scope swung toward the sound, catching a flash of movement. For a split second, he saw his opponent clearly, a tall figure in Wehrmacht gray, moving with that same liquid grace. Their eyes met through layers of darkness and glass, an impossible moment of connection. Then the figure was gone, melting into the shadows as if it had never existed. But in that brief instant, Jack had seen something that chilled him more than the night air. The German had smiled, not a smile of mockery or threat, but one of genuine pleasure. The smile of a master craftsman appreciating another's work. "Dawn's coming," Lou's voice warned unnecessarily. "Hope you're ready for round 2. Jack settled deeper into his position, ignoring the protests of his tired muscles. Ready didn't enter into it. This was what he was made for, what years of training and combat had prepared him for. Somewhere out there, another master of death was thinking the exact same thing. The night held its breath, waiting to see which of them would blink first. The darkness had become a living thing, breathing with the slow pulse of the ruined city. Jack forced his own breathing to match its rhythm, shallow and quiet as he prepared to move from his position. The first hint of pre-dawn gray touched the eastern sky, but true light was still hours away. If he was going to reposition, now was the time. "Easy does it, Jackie," Lou's voice cautioned in his mind. "Remember Manila? How that Japanese sniper almost got you because you rushed it?" Jack remembered. He'd been younger then, more impatient. The memory of his near death had taught him the true meaning of patience. But this was different. His opponent wasn't some desperate holdout fighting a losing battle. This was a chess master playing the long game. A flutter of movement caught his eye, a piece of paper carried on the night wind, dancing between the shells of burned-out buildings. Jack tracked it through his scope, watching how it moved, reading the air currents. The paper suddenly changed direction, caught in an eddy of wind, or disturbed by something else. Someone else. "He's using the wind to mask his movement," Jack whispered, admiration coloring his exhaustion, timing his steps with the gusts. The paper disappeared into the darkness, but Jack had seen enough. His opponent was close, within 100 yards, moving parallel to Jack's position. The German was taking a terrible risk, changing locations in territory he knew Jack was watching. Unless he wants you to know he's moving. Lou's voice finished the thought. Question is, why show his hand now? Before Jack could consider the implications, a massive explosion lit up the western sky. The flash transformed night into brief artificial day, casting stark shadows across the urban wasteland. In that frozen moment of illumination, Jack saw him. a silhouette framed in the window of a partially collapsed office building. The German stood motionless, his rifle clearly visible, making no attempt to hide. Jack's finger tensed on the buy trigger. The shot was clear. Perfect. Too perfect. "It's what you'd do, isn't it?" Lou's voice cut through his focus. "Stand there like a target, knowing your enemy won't take the shot because it's too easy." The light faded, plunging the city back into darkness. Jack held his breath, waiting. No sound of movement came from the office building. His opponent was still there, waiting just like him, each man knowing that the first to break the stillness would likely die. Minutes stretched into an hour. Jack's muscles screamed for relief, but he remained frozen. This was the true test of a sniper, not just accuracy or stealth, but the ability to become stone, to deny every human impulse to move, to stretch, to ease the burning in your joints. "He's testing your limits," Lou observed. As he studied it, something caught his eye. A small mark scratched into the metal beside the hole. He held it closer, squinting in the fading light. Not a mark. A letter. K. "Well, that's new." Lou's voice held a note of grudging admiration. "Guy's leaving you his autograph." But Jack wasn't listening. His mind was racing through years of intelligence briefings, mission reports, whispered stories from other snipers. A German marksman who signed his kills with a K. There had been rumors dismissed as propaganda or frightened exaggeration. But now, a distant explosion lit up the sky, briefly illuminating the ruins in harsh white light. In that instant, Jack caught a glimpse of a figure standing in a window 3 buildings away, just standing there watching. By the time his eyes adjusted, the figure was gone. But the image burned in his mind, the straight-backed military bearing, the casual confidence of someone who knew they were untouchable. "You're not hunting a ghost," Jack muttered to himself as he melted back into the shadows. "You're hunting a legend." The night was falling fast now, bringing with it a new phase of their deadly game. Jack found a defensible position among the mate ruins, one that offered multiple escape routes and clear lines of sight in all directions. He would need every advantage in the hours ahead, because somewhere out there in the darkness a master of death was waiting. And Jack had the unsettling feeling that everything so far had been nothing more than a warm-up. Darkness settled over the ruins like a burial shroud. Jack's world had contracted to the circle of his scope, a moon-pale window into the night. 3 hours had passed since the last shot, or maybe 4. Time lost meaning in the endless wait, marked only by the slow drift of stars across breaks in the clouds. His position was solid, a corner room in what had once been an apartment building, with sight lines covering the most likely approach routes. But most likely meant nothing with this opponent. The German, the legend with the K signature, had already proven that conventional tactics were merely suggestions to him. "You're getting soft, Jackie," Lou's voice whispered in the darkness. "Remember Bastogne? We went 5 days without sleep. This is just your first night." Jack blinked hard, forcing his eyes to stay focused. Bastogne had been different. They'd had each other then, trading watch shifts, keeping each other sharp with quiet jokes and shared cigarettes. Now there was only the silence, broken occasionally by the distant thunder of artillery or the hollow whistle of wind through shattered buildings. A piece of rubble shifted somewhere in the darkness, the faintest scrape of stone against stone. Jack's muscles tensed, but he kept his breathing steady. The sound could have been anything: a stray cat, settling debris, the ghost of someone's peaceful life before the war turned their home into a hunting ground. But he knew better. The sound had been deliberate, too careful to be accidental. "He's testing your patience," Lou's voice observed, "seeing if exhaustion will make you sloppy." Jack allowed himself a grim smile. His opponent was good, maybe the best he'd ever faced. But patience? That was something Jack had mastered long ago. You didn't become a top sniper without learning to embrace the silence, to let time flow around you like water while you waited for that perfect moment. Another sound whispered through the night, fabric brushing against stone, so quiet he felt it more than heard it. Jack's scope shifted fractionally, following his instincts. There, a deeper shadow among shadows, moving with liquid grace between broken walls. He had less than a second to register the figure before it vanished, but the image burned itself into his mind. The fluid economy of movement, the way the soldier seemed to flow through the darkness rather than move through it. Beautiful, Jack murmured, genuine admiration in his voice, like watching a damn ghost. The night seemed to agree, swallowing his words in its vast silence. Somewhere out there, his opponent was watching, waiting, probably admiring Jack's own patience with the same professional respect. This wasn't just combat anymore. It was an exhibition match between two masters, each testing the other's limits. Hours crawled by. Jack's shoulders ached from holding his position, but he didn't dare shift. The smallest movement, the faintest sound could give him away. His world had narrowed to the basic elements of survival. Breathe, watch, listen, wait. Even Lou's voice had fallen silent, as if recognizing the need for absolute concentration. A cold wind whispered through the ruins, carrying with it the acrid smell of burning buildings from the front lines. The war felt distant now, almost irrelevant. This private duel had taken on a life of its own, operating by rules that had nothing to do with armies or nations, seeing how long you can hold out. No, Jack murmured, barely a breath. He's showing me his own. Another explosion rumbled in the distance, but this time the German silhouette didn't appear. Jack felt a grudging smile touch his lips. His opponent was playing with perception, using Jack's expectations against him, making him question every shadow, every movement. Dawn was creeping closer. Soon the game would change again. Light would bring new challenges, new risks, but it would also bring clarity. In the night, they were both ghosts, hunting each other through intuition and sound. Daylight would make them men again, vulnerable, deadly, and running out of time. You know what's really eating at you? Lou's voice came again, softer now. It's not just that he's good. It's that he thinks like you, moves like you, waits like you. Jack shifted his weight microscopically, easing the pressure on his cramping legs. The truth in Lou's words settled over him like the night's chill. Every hour that passed convinced him more. This wasn't just another sniper. This was someone who had walked the same path, made the same choices, carried the same burdens. A mirror image, separated only by the accident of which side they fought for. A soft scraping sound drew his attention back to the present. Something was moving in the rubble below. A rat, maybe, or falling debris. But Jack knew better. His opponent was sending another message. I'm still here, still watching, still waiting. Sun's coming up soon, Lou's voice warned. Better decide what you're going to do about that. Jack remained motionless, his scope unwavering. Exhaustion pulled at him with leaden fingers, but he pushed it away. His opponent wouldn't sleep, wouldn't rest, would wait until one of them made that crucial mistake that would end their deadly dance. The eastern sky continued to brighten, impossibly slow. Somewhere in the ruins, another master of death watched it too, both men knowing that with the dawn would come a reckoning. Only one of them would see the sun set again. But first, they had to survive the waiting. The first rays of dawn painted the ruins in shades of amber and gray, transforming the nighttime battlefield into something almost beautiful. Jack's eyes burned from exhaustion, but his hands remained steady as they had for the past 8 hours. That's when he saw it, the deliberate movement of his target across a gap between buildings. The German moved like flowing water, each step precise and measured. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Just the perfect economy of movement that came from years of practicing the art of staying alive. Jack tracked him through the scope, leading the target slightly, compensating for wind and distance. The shot was there, clean and clear as crystal. Take it, Lou's voice urged. What are you waiting for? But Jack's finger wouldn't pull the trigger. Something about the way the German moved had frozen him in place. It wasn't just skill. It was like watching himself in a mirror. The same careful foot placement, the same way of keeping his rifle close to his center of gravity, the same slight tilt of the head that spoke of constantly calculating angles and trajectories. The German paused in his movement, and for a heart-stopping moment Jack thought he'd been spotted. But no. His opponent was checking his own angles, scanning for threats exactly as Jack would have done. The morning light caught the man's profile, and Jack saw something that made his blood run cold. The German was smiling. Not the grim smile of a hunter, but the peaceful expression of someone completely in their element. "Just like you, Jackie," Lou whispered. "Remember how you used to smile like that? Before everything went to hell?" Jack's crosshairs settled on the center of his target's chest. A single squeeze of the trigger would end it, complete his mission, avenge Lou. But the German's stance nagged at him, something familiar about the way he held himself, the particular angle of his rifle. The memory hit him like a physical blow. 2 weeks ago, the day Lou died. They'd been moving through another ruined city, confident in their routine. But the shot that killed Lou had come from an impossible angle, one that no ordinary sniper would have attempted. An angle that required complete mastery of the craft, an understanding of ballistics that went beyond training into pure artistry, an angle exactly like the one the German was using now. "It was him," Jack breathed, the revelation settling like ice in his gut. "He's the one who—" The thought was cut short by the thunderous crack of a mortar shell landing nearby. The blast threw debris into the air, forcing Jack to duck behind cover. His ears rang from the explosion, but training kept his body still, his movements minimal. When the dust settled, he raised his scope again. The German was gone. "Damn it," Jack hissed, through clenched teeth. The perfect shot. Lost. But something else gnawed at him. Why had he hesitated? Was it really just the recognition of Lou's killer? Or was it something deeper? "You know why." Lou's voice came soft and certain. "You saw yourself out there. The way you used to be before the war turned you into something else. Before you started counting kills instead of moments." Jack scanned the ruins frantically, searching for any sign of his quarry. But he knew it was useless. His opponent had used the mortar blast exactly as Jack would have, as cover for a planned movement to a pre-selected position. This wasn't just some skilled enemy sniper. This was someone who thought in multiple moves, who planned for contingencies, who understood the psychology of the hunt as intimately as Jack did. "He's not just good," Jack muttered, finally allowing himself to shift position, easing his cramping muscles. "He's what I could have been if things were different." The thought should have disturbed him more than it did. Instead, it filled him with a strange kind of clarity. If he was going to end this, he couldn't do it from a distance. This duel had become too personal, too intimate for long-range kills and patient waiting. "You're thinking of getting closer," Lou's voice held a note of warning. "That's exactly what he expects you to do." "I know," Jack replied, already plotting his route through the ruins. "But sometimes the obvious move is the right one, because it's what you do yourself." He began breaking down his position, each movement practiced and silent. The sun was climbing higher, bringing with it new shadows, new angles, new possibilities. Somewhere out there his mirror image was waiting, probably thinking the same thoughts, making the same plans. This wasn't just about killing anymore. It was about understanding. And to understand a ghost, sometimes you had to walk right into the haunted house. The journey down from his perch felt like descending into another world. Jack moved through the ruins with practiced silence, but each step brought him closer to ground level, closer to where the war had left its deepest scars. The morning light revealed details that darkness had hidden. Shattered family photographs, crunching under his boots, a child's doll half buried in rubble, the ghostly outlines of furniture on walls where homes had been torn open like broken dollhouses. "Getting awful personal now, Jackie," Lou's voice commented as Jack paused to scan his surroundings. "Down here you can't pretend it's just another mission." He was right. Up in the bell tower, it had been easier to see the city as just a battlefield, a geometric problem of angles and distances. But here among the ruins of civilian lives, the reality of what war had done was impossible to ignore. Jack's trained eye caught something, a subtle displacement of debris near a collapsed storefront. Moving closer, he recognized it immediately, a sniper's nest recently abandoned. The position had been carefully constructed, with multiple firing ports and a clear escape route. But what caught his attention was how it had been left. "Look familiar?" Lou asked unnecessarily. It did. The setup was nearly identical to how Jack arranged his own positions. Even the way the spent cartridge cases had been collected and removed matched his procedure. All except one, a single brass casing standing upright in the center of the nest, positioned with deliberate precision. Jack studied it without touching it. The morning light caught the brass, making it shine like a beacon. Another message? Or a trap? A soft sound behind him made him spin, rifle raised. His finger tensed on the trigger, then froze. Instead of his opponent, he found himself staring at a young woman crouched in the shadows of a doorway. Her clothes were dirty but not ragged, her face thin but not starved. What caught his attention were her eyes. They held no fear, only a wary calculation that seemed out of place on such a young face. "Inga Bauer?" he asked softly, remembering the intelligence briefings about civilians still trapped in the city. She didn't answer, but something flickered in her expression at the name. Her eyes moved to his rifle, then back to his face, measuring him just as he measured her. "You should not be here," she finally said in careful English. "He does not wish to be disturbed." Jack's pulse quickened. "You know him? The sniper?" Inga's lips tightened. "I know of him. Everyone who remains knows of him." She glanced at the abandoned nest. "He protects us, in his way. Keeps the looters away. Sometimes leaves food." "He's a Wehrmacht sniper," Jack said, but even as the words left his mouth, they felt wrong. This was about more than uniforms and sides. "He was Wehrmacht," Inga corrected, her voice carrying a weight of understanding beyond her years. "Now, he is like the city. Something else. Something left behind by the war." Jack's trained instincts screamed at him to ignore her, to focus on his mission. A civilian was just a complication, a potential liability. But something in her eyes held him in place, a knowledge, a secret she was deciding whether to share. "The K he leaves," Jack found himself saying. "What does it mean?" Inga's expression shifted subtly. "You asked the wrong question, American. The right question is not what it means, but why he wants you to see it." A distant shot rang out, not aimed at them, but close enough to make Jack instinctively move to cover. When he looked back, Ing had disappeared into the ruins as silently as his quarry. "Well, that was interesting," Lou's voice mused. "Girl knows more than she's saying." Jack stared at the doorway where she had been, his mind racing. The German sniper wasn't just hunting in these ruins. He was living in them, protecting them in his own way. And Inga's words suggested something else. This wasn't just about killing. His opponent was trying to tell him something, leading him through this deadly maze for a purpose. "She's going to get herself killed," Jack muttered, torn between his mission and the urge to find her again, to learn what she knew. "Maybe," Lou agreed. "Or maybe she's exactly where she needs to be. Like you." Another shot echoed through the ruins, closer this time, but still not targeting them. A signal? A warning? Or another piece in the complex game they were playing? Jack checked his rifle, then looked back at the deliberately placed cartridge case. His opponent wasn't just leaving signs of his presence. He was leaving a trail. The question was, did Jack follow it because he wanted to end this or because he needed to understand? The answer, he realized, was both. And somewhere in the ruins, a German sniper who thought exactly like him had known that all along. Jack watched the space where Ingi had vanished, counting his heartbeats until he was certain she was truly gone. Her words echoed in his mind. The right question is not what it means, but why he wants you to see it. She'd known something about his opponent, something about this entire deadly game that he was only beginning to understand. "Time to move," Lou's voice prompted, "before you start thinking too hard about civilian casualties and collateral damage." Jack nodded to himself, pushing away thoughts of the young woman's haunted eyes. He had a mission. The German sniper's last known position was less than 200 yards away, in the gutted remains of what had once been a bank. Moving between cover, Jack approached with the patience of a man who knew he was being watched. The bank's marble facade was pockmarked with bullet holes and shrapnel scars, its grand columns now serving as tombstones for a dead city's glory. Jack entered through a side door, his boots silent on the debris-strewn floor. The interior was a maze of fallen ceiling tiles and overturned furniture, but his experienced eye immediately spotted the path his quarry had taken. Subtle disturbances in the dust, minute shifts in the rubble that only another sniper would notice. "He's leading you somewhere," Lou warned. "Question is, why make it this obvious?" The trail led to what had once been an executive office, its large windows offering commanding views of 3 major streets. A perfect sniper's nest. Too perfect. Jack swept the room with his rifle before entering, every nerve screaming that this was a trap. But what he found was something far more unsettling. In the center of the room, on what remained of a mahogany desk, stood a single rifle bullet. Not a cartridge case this time, a complete round standing impossibly upright on its base. Beside it lay a folded piece of paper, crisp and white against the dust and debris. Jack's hands were steady as he picked up the paper, but his heart hammered against his ribs. The message was written in precise English, the handwriting almost architectural in its precision. "I know you." "Well, that's not creepy at all," Lou's voice dripped with sarcasm, but Jack could hear the unease beneath it. He studied the bullet standing on the desk. Like everything else about his opponent, its placement was deliberate, exact. The morning light caught its brass casing, creating a tiny beacon that drew the eye. But something about it seemed familiar, the particular wear pattern on the casing, the slight discoloration near the primer. Recognition hit him like a physical blow. It was one of his rounds, one of the bullets from his own rifle recovered from where it had struck stone during yesterday's duel. His opponent hadn't just collected it, he'd studied it, learned from it, and now returned it as a message. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the silence. Jack dove instinctively, rolling behind an overturned filing cabinet as the bullet passed through the space where he'd been standing. The shot hadn't been meant to kill, it had been too wide, too obvious. Another message. "He's telling you he could have taken the shot." Lou's voice was tight with tension. "But he wants something else first." Jack pressed himself against the cabinet, mind racing. The German sniper knew him, not just as an enemy, but personally, had studied him enough to recognize his ammunition, to predict his movements, to understand his thinking. But how? When? The answer tickled the edges of his memory. A mission briefing from months ago, a dossier he'd barely glanced at. Something about an elite German marksman who had once. Another shot rang out, this one striking the window frame with surgical precision. Jack watched as the bullet embedded itself in the wood, its angle and placement forming a perfect line, with the standing bullet on the desk. Not random. A direction. A pointer. "He's showing you where to go next," Lou observed. "Like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. Except this trail leads somewhere a lot darker than Grandma's house." Jack studied the trajectory, calculating angles and distances in his head. The shot had come from the ruins of an old theater 2 blocks away, but more importantly, it had come from exactly the position he would have chosen himself. "This isn't just about killing anymore," he muttered, checking his rifle with mechanical precision. "He's trying to tell me something he thinks I need to know before one of us dies." "And that doesn't worry you?" Lou's voice held a warning edge. "That he knows you well enough to play you like this?" Jack rose slowly, keeping to cover. The standing bullet on the desk caught the light one last time before he knocked it over with deliberate care. "What worries me," he replied softly, "is that part of me understands exactly why he's doing it." He moved toward the door, already, plotting his route to the theater. His opponent was weaving a web of memory and meaning, each message more personal than the last. The game had changed. This wasn't about completing a mission anymore. This was about understanding why he'd been chosen for it in the first place. And somewhere in the ruins ahead, a ghost who knew him better than he knew himself was waiting to explain. Jack pressed himself against the crumbling wall of the theater's outer lobby, mind racing as he tried to piece together the puzzle his opponent had laid before him. The precision of the shots, the psychological warfare, the way each move seemed designed to probe not just his skill but his understanding. It all felt hauntingly familiar. "Come on, Jackie," Lou's voice urged. "You've seen this before, think." The memory hit him like a splash of cold water. A briefing room in London, 18 months ago. The intelligence officer had been discussing a particular German sniper, one whose reputation had grown into something approaching legend. Jack had only been half listening, cocky and certain of his own abilities. But certain details had stuck. Hauptmann Elias Roth, he whispered the name, feeling its weight on his tongue. Olympic marksman, perfect scorer in the 36 games. The details came flooding back now. Roth had been a celebrated sport shooter before the war, known for his almost supernatural ability to read wind conditions and calculate trajectories. When war came, he'd turned those skills to deadlier purpose, becoming one of the Wehrmacht's most effective snipers. But it wasn't just his kill count that had made him legendary. It was his methodology. "The way he thinks," Jack murmured, pieces clicking into place. "He doesn't just shoot to kill. He teaches," Lou finished. "Every kill is a lesson. Every shot carries a message." Another memory surfaced, a photograph in the briefing file. Roth standing proud in his Wehrmacht uniform, but it was his eyes that had caught Jack's attention even then. They weren't the eyes of a killer, but of a professor, someone who saw his craft as an art to be shared, even in its deadliest form. A bullet whined past Jack's ear, so close he felt its passage in his hair. He didn't flinch. The shot hadn't been meant to kill. Its angle and timing were too precise. Roth was confirming Jack's realization, acknowledging that his student had finally recognized his teacher. "But why me?" Jack whispered, scanning the ruins ahead. "Why this elaborate game?" "Because you're alike." Lou's voice was soft with understanding. "Two artists in a world that only sees the death you bring, not the beauty in how you bring it." Another shot cracked through the morning air, this one striking the wall in a precise pattern with the first. Together, they formed an arrow, pointing toward the theater's main entrance. Roth was directing him, leading him deeper into this deadly labyrinth of recognition and revelation. Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. He'd heard stories about Roth's previous engagements, how he would sometimes spend days dueling with an enemy sniper, not to kill them, but to push them to their limits, to force them to transcend their training and touch something deeper, more primal, more pure. "He's not trying to kill you." Lou's voice held a note of awe. "He's trying to perfect you." The truth of it settled in Jack's chest like a physical weight. Every shot Roth had taken, every message left, every carefully orchestrated move, they weren't the actions of a man trying to win a war. They were the lessons of a master trying to shape his finest student. A third shot rang out, closer now. Jack tracked its source automatically, noting how Roth had positioned himself to maintain perfect firing angles while staying just out of effective range. It was a technique Jack himself had developed, one he'd never shared with anyone but Lou. "He's been watching you for a while," Lou warned. "Learning your methods, understanding your mind. Question is, what's the final lesson?" Jack checked his ammunition, each movement precise and practiced. If Roth was truly the legend the briefings had described, this duel wasn't about survival or victory. It was about evolution, about pushing the boundaries of their deadly art until something transcendent emerged. "Only one way to find out," Jack muttered, already plotting his approach to the theater entrance. But as he moved forward, a new thought nagged at him. If Roth had chosen him as a student, what price would come with the final lesson? The theater loomed before him, its grand facade pockmarked by war but still maintaining a ghostly elegance. Somewhere inside, a master of death waited to complete his pupil's education. Jack took a deep breath, remembering everything he'd heard about Roth's psychological warfare, his almost philosophical approach to killing. The game was changing. This wasn't just a duel between snipers anymore. It was a test, an initiation, a deadly communion between two men who had turned death into an art form. And Jack had the unsettling feeling that passing Roth's final exam might be worse than failing it. The theater's grand foyer stretched before Jack like a tomb. Morning, light filtering through shattered skylights to paint ghostly patterns on the marble floor. He made his decision in an instant. Something reckless, something that went against every instinct honed by years of combat. He stepped into the open, deliberately exposing himself. "Have you lost your mind?" Lou's voice hissed in alarm. But Jack knew what he was doing. If Roth truly was the teacher he appeared to be, this wasn't about survival anymore. It was about understanding. The shot came exactly as he expected. Precise, controlled, striking the floor just inches from his left boot. The message was clear. "I could have killed you, but that's not the point." Jack remained motionless, counting his heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Then he shifted his weight slightly, telegraphing his next move. Another shot rang out, this one passing so close to his shoulder he felt the air displacement. But still, he didn't dive for cover. "It's like watching two chess masters," Lou observed, his initial panic giving way to fascination. Each move carrying meaning beyond the obvious. A glint of metal caught Jack's eye, something lying on a nearby window ledge that hadn't been there moments before. He approached carefully, rifle ready but not aimed. The object revealed itself. A rifle cartridge, carefully placed on its side. But this one was different. Words had been etched into the brass with painstaking precision. "Der Weg zur Wahrheit," Jack read aloud, his German rusty but serviceable. "The path to truth." "Well, that's suitably cryptic," Lou commented. "What truth is worth this elaborate dance of death?" Jack studied the cartridge, turning it in the dim light. The engraving was perfect, each letter carved with the same precision Roth brought to his shots. This wasn't something done in haste. It had been prepared long before their duel began. Roth had known they would reach this moment. "He's not trying to kill me," Jack said softly, the realization settling deep in his bones. "He's trying to wake me up." Movement flickered at the edge of his vision, deliberate, meant to be seen. Roth stood in a doorway across the foyer, his rifle pointed at the ground. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the bullet-scarred expanse. Jack saw in the German's face the same thing he felt in himself, the weight of too many kills, too many moments spent dealing death from the shadows. Then Roth spoke, his voice carrying clearly across the space. "Du verstehst. You understand." Before Jack could respond, Roth vanished into the shadows of the theater's interior. But he left behind something propped against the doorframe, a small notebook, its leather cover worn with use. "It's a trap," Lou warned, but Jack was already moving forward. This was part of the lesson, part of the truth Roth wanted him to see. The notebook's pages were filled with precise handwriting, diagrams, calculations, about what it means to hold the power of death in your hands. Jack's mind went back to the journal, to those carefully written meditations on the nature of their craft. One line stood out now with crystal clarity. "The true test of a sniper is not in who he kills, but in who he chooses to spare." The German soldiers disappeared around a corner, never knowing how close they had come to death, or how much their lives had just taught Jack about the man he was hunting. He lowered his rifle slowly, understanding flowing through him like ice water. "He's not a Nazi anymore," Jack said softly. "He's not even really a soldier, he's something else." "A philosopher with a rifle," Lou suggested, "playing out some kind of moral experiment in the ruins of the world." Jack touched the journal through his jacket, feeling its weight anew. Every shot Roth had taken, every message left, every move, in their deadly chess game. It wasn't about killing. It was about choice. About showing Jack that even in the midst of total war, they still had the power to decide who lived and who died. A single shot rang out, striking the wall near Jack's position. Not a kill shot, a signal. Roth was ready to continue their dance. But now the steps had changed. This wasn't just about skill or survival anymore. It was about understanding the true weight of their shared power, the burden of choosing death. Well, Lou's voice held a note of dark humor. Guess it's time to see what other moral lessons he has planned for you. Jack checked his rifle, mind already calculating angles and positions. But for the first time since this duel began, he wasn't thinking about how to kill Roth. He was thinking about what truth was worth dying to understand. The German soldiers' retreating footsteps had faded to nothing, leaving only the hollow silence of the ruined city. Somewhere in that silence, a teacher of death waited to share his final wisdom. Jack moved forward into the shadows of the theater, knowing that whatever came next would change him forever. The foundations of the old theater complex ran deep, a maze of maintenance tunnels and storage rooms that had been converted into makeshift bomb shelters early in the war. Jack found the entrance behind a fallen curtain, stairs leading down, into darkness. Military instinct told him to avoid it. Underground spaces were death traps, perfect for ambush. But something else, something he was learning to trust, told him this was the next step in Roth's elaborate lesson. Watch yourself, Lou cautioned as Jack descended. Underground changes everything, sound, light, angles, nothing works quite the way you expect. The beam of Jack's flashlight revealed walls covered in the detritus of civilian survival, children's drawings, calendar pages marking days spent hiding from death above, faded photographs of happier times. Then the light caught movement, and Jack's rifle snapped up automatically. You won't need that, Inga's voice came from the shadows. Not here. This is a place of truth, not violence. She stepped into the light, looking somehow both younger and older than before. Her eyes held the same calculating intelligence, but now there was something else, a weight of knowledge she seemed ready to share. You've read his journal, she said. Not a question. You begin to understand. Jack lowered his rifle slowly but didn't relax. Understand what? Why a legendary German sniper is playing philosophical games instead of fighting for his country? His country? A bitter smile touched Inga's lips. Germany stopped being his country the day the bombs fell on Munich, the day he lost everything. She moved to a shelf lined with old food tins and refugee blankets, pulling out what looked like a newspaper clipping. The paper was yellow with age, but the photograph was still clear. A younger Roth standing proud in civilian clothes, a beautiful woman beside him holding a small child. They were smiling, unaware that the camera had captured their last moment of happiness. His wife, Maria. Their daughter, Ava. Inga's voice was soft with old grief. They died in the first major bombing raid. He was away, training other snipers. By the time he returned, there was nothing left but ashes and questions. Jack studied the photograph, seeing for the first time the man behind the legend. The eyes were different, alive with joy instead of the cold calculation he'd glimpsed through his scope. What questions? The same ones we all ask. When war takes everything we love. Inga took the photograph back, handling it with reverence. What is it all for? What makes one death more righteous than another? When does a soldier become just a killer with a flag? The weight of Roth's journal seemed to grow heavier against Jack's chest. All those philosophical musings about death and purpose, they weren't abstract concepts. They were born from personal apocalypse. My family died in the same raid, Inga continued. A sniper's journal, but unlike any Jack had seen before. Between the ballistic tables and wind charts were philosophical musings, quotes from ancient warriors, meditations on the nature of taking life from afar. One passage, underlined heavily, caught his eye. The true sniper is not a killer, but a mirror, reflecting back the darkness men carry within themselves. Our art is not in dealing death, but in showing life its own fatal flaws. He sees it as a calling, Jack murmured, pieces clicking into place. Not just killing, but illumination. Another shot cracked through the air, striking the wall beside him, but this one was different. The bullet had fragmented on impact, spreading across the marble in a pattern too precise to be accidental. Jack studied it, understanding flowing through him like ice water. The fragments formed a symbol he recognized, from Roth's journal, the alchemical sign for transformation. "He's not testing your skill." Lou's voice came with sudden clarity. "He's testing your understanding of what this all means, what it's done to you." Jack closed the journal carefully, tucking it into his jacket. The weight of it seemed to burn against his chest, filled with deadly wisdom he wasn't sure he was ready to accept. But Roth had chosen him for a reason. This elaborate game, this dance of death and philosophy, it was all leading to something. "Time to find out what truth is worth dying for," Jack said, checking his rifle one last time. He moved toward the theater's main auditorium, following the path Roth had laid out. Each step felt heavy with meaning, like a pilgrim approaching a dark shrine. Somewhere in the shadows ahead, a master of death waited to reveal the final truth about their shared art. The question was, would Jack survive the revelation? The theater's main auditorium yawned before Jack like the mouth of some ancient beast, rows of broken seats leading down to a stage half hidden in shadows. Roth's journal weighed heavy against his chest, its philosophical musings about death and purpose still echoing in his mind. But before he could advance further into the darkness, sounds from outside froze him in place. Boots on broken stone. Multiple sets, moving with the weary rhythm of men who had marched too far and seen too much. Jack melted into the shadows of a private box, his rifle finding a natural rest on the ornate railing. Through his scope, he watched as a squad of German soldiers appeared in the street below. At least 8 of them, Lou's voice provided the count automatically, looking pretty ragged, probably retreating from the front line. Jack's trained eye confirmed the assessment. The soldiers moved with the desperate energy of men who knew they were beaten but weren't ready to admit it yet. Their uniforms were dirty, their equipment showing signs of hard use. But they were still armed, still dangerous, and they were walking right into the kill zone between 2 master snipers. "Roth has to take the shot," Jack muttered. "They'll give away his position if they spot him." He swept his scope across the likely firing positions where Roth might be hidden, expecting to see the flash of a muzzle at any moment. These were enemy soldiers, after all. Whatever philosophical game Roth was playing with Jack, surely he wouldn't let his own men walk into danger, but no shot came. The German squad moved through the street like ghosts, unaware of the death that could rain down from above at any moment. Jack kept his scope trained on them, finger resting light on the trigger. If Roth wasn't going to take the shot, maybe he should. "But that's not what this is about anymore, is it?" Lou's voice cut through his combat instincts. Jack watched through his scope as the soldiers passed directly below what he knew to be one of Roth's firing positions. For a moment he caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows, Roth shifting slightly to stay hidden as his countrymen passed beneath him. The German sniper could have killed them all with mechanical efficiency. Instead, he chose to let them live. "Interesting choice," Lou observed. "For a man who's supposed to be fighting for the fatherland." The truth hit Jack with the force of revelation. Roth wasn't fighting for Germany anymore. Maybe he never had been. This private war they were waging had nothing to do with nations or causes. It was about something far more personal, far more profound. Through his scope, Jack caught another movement, deliberate this time. Roth had emerged partially from his hiding spot, just enough to be seen by someone watching for him. The German's face was in shadow, but his posture spoke volumes. He stood straight, proud, like a teacher waiting to see if his student would grasp the lesson. "He's showing you something," Lou's voice was thoughtful. "Roth found me afterward, hiding in ruins like these. He could have left me to die. Instead, he taught me to survive, to understand." "Understand what?" "That there are no sides in this war anymore. Only men with guns, killing other men with guns while the innocent burn." She fixed Jack with a penetrating stare. "How many families have you ended, American? How many wives made widows? Children made orphans by your perfect shots?" Jack felt the questions like physical blows. Every kill he'd made had been sanctioned, ordered, necessary for the war effort. But each one had been a thread in a web of tragedy he'd never stopped to consider. "Roth isn't hunting you for revenge," Ing said, reading his expression. "He's hunting you because you're like him, an artist of death who hasn't yet understood the true cost of his art." "And what happens when I understand?" Jack asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "One of you dies. That's the only way this ends." She touched the photograph one last time before returning it to its hiding place. "But death isn't always what it seems. Sometimes it's a door to something else." A shot rang out above them, the sound muffled by layers of stone and earth. Roth's signal, calling Jack back to their deadly dance. "He's waiting," Ing said unnecessarily. "The question is, what will you do with what you now know?" Jack checked his rifle automatically, but the motion felt different now, heavy, with new meaning. Why tell me all this? Why help him teach this lesson? Inga's smile was sad and ancient. Because someone has to remember. Someone has to understand that even in the midst of all this death, we have choices. We can kill without thinking, or we can kill with full knowledge of what we're destroying. Roth believes the second kind of killing might save what's left of our souls. Another shot echoed above, more urgent this time. Jack moved toward the stairs, but Inga's voice stopped him one last time. "When you face him," she said, "remember, he's not trying to kill you. He's trying to show you why killing matters." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jack climbed back into the war-torn world above, leaving Inga in her underground sanctuary of memories. Roth's journal pressed against his heart like a stone tablet of deadly commandments. Now he understood the weight of its wisdom, bought with blood and grief. The game wasn't over, but the rules had changed. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about understanding, truly understanding, what it meant to deal death from a distance. And somewhere in the ruins above, a man who had lost everything waited to see if his student was ready for the final lesson. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across the battlefield of their private war. Jack stood in the shelter of a broken wall, Roth's journal burning against his chest like a hot coal. Inga's words echoed in his mind. "He's not trying to kill you. He's trying to show you why killing matters." It was time to acknowledge the truth, time to show Roth that his student understood. "You're really going to do this?" Lou's voice held a mix of concern and admiration. "Signal him deliberately?" Jack's answer was to raise his rifle and fire, a precise shot that struck the wall, 6 inches from where he knew Roth was hiding. Not a miss. An invitation. The response was immediate. Roth's bullet sang past Jack's shoulder, close enough that he felt the displaced air against his neck. The shot carried the same message. "I see you, I understand. It's like watching a dance," Lou mused as Jack began moving through the ruins, each step calculated and precise. "You're both following the same rhythm." He was right. Jack could feel it now. The way he and Roth moved in perfect counterpoint, each anticipating the other's positions, each understanding inherently where the other would go. This wasn't combat anymore. It was choreography. Through his scope, Jack caught glimpses of Roth moving through parallel streets. The German's technique was flawless, every motion speaking of decades of experience and countless kills. But there was something else there now, something Jack recognized from looking in too many mirrors, the weight of a man who had nothing left but his craft. "He's not trying to win," Jack whispered, the revelation settling into his bones. "He's waiting for me to prove I deserve to end this." Another exchange of shots, neither meant to kill. They were ranging each other, testing limits, speaking a language of trajectory and trigger pull that only masters of their art could understand. Each bullet carried a message. "I could end this now. But that's not why we're here." "You're the same." Lou's voice was quiet. "Both of you turned killing. into an art, because it was better than facing what the war really meant. What it took from you. Jack moved to a new position, knowing Roth would mirror his action from the other side of the street. They were dancing around the truth now, both understanding that this duel would end in death, not because of hatred or duty, but because there was no other way for men like them to find peace. Through his scope, Jack caught Roth in the open for a split second. The German stood proud, rifle held with perfect form, every inch the Olympic champion he had once been. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that moment, Jack saw himself, not as he was, but as he would become. A man so devoted to dealing death that he had forgotten how to live. That's why he chose you, Lou said softly. He saw what you could become, what you're already becoming. Jack's finger tensed on the trigger, then relaxed. The shot was perfect, but taking it would mean accepting the path Roth had walked, becoming a pure instrument of death, unmarred by doubt or humanity. Instead, he fired wide again. This time with a slight adjustment to his aim that he knew Roth would recognize. It was a technique for shooting around corners that Jack had developed himself, never shared with anyone but Lou. Roth's answering shot came using the exact same technique. A message, clear as words. I've been watching you, learning from you, seeing myself in you. He's been studying you for months. Lou's voice held dawning understanding. Every shot you took, every technique you developed, he wasn't just learning your skills, he was learning who you are. Jack moved through the ruins with mechanical precision, but his mind was racing. How long had Roth been watching him? How many of Jack's kills had the German witnessed, analyzing not just his technique, but his soul? Another shot from Roth, this one forming a perfect geometric pattern with his previous two. Not random. A message written in bullet holes. Your move. He's waiting, Jack whispered, understanding flowing through him like ice water. Waiting to see if I'll make the same choice he did. Let the war burn away everything but the perfect geometry of the kill. The sun reached its zenith, casting no shadows, no more places to hide. Jack knew what came next. They would meet in the open, two masters of death facing each other without pretense. One would die. But the real question wasn't who would survive. The question was, would the survivor walk away enlightened or merely empty? Time to choose, Jackie. Lou's voice was barely a whisper. Are you really ready to see yourself that clearly? Jack chambered around with practiced care, each movement a prayer or a curse. Somewhere across the battlefield, Roth was doing the same, both men preparing for a moment of truth that had nothing to do with victory. This was about recognition, about seeing yourself in your enemy's eyes and deciding whether to embrace or reject what you found there. Jack stepped out of cover, rifle ready. It was time to learn what kind of killer he really was. The moment crystallized like amber, trapping both men in its perfect clarity. Jack's crosshairs settled on Roth's chest, the German silhouette framed against a broken window like a target in a shooting gallery. Through his scope, Jack could see every detail. The precise way Roth held his rifle, the slight angle of his head, the absolute stillness that marked him as a master of their craft. And in Roth's scope, Jack knew his own image waited just as perfect, just as still. This is it, Jackie. Lou's voice came soft and clear. The shot you've been waiting for. The one that ends it all. Jack's finger rested light on the trigger, muscle memory ready to complete the motion he'd performed countless times before. One gentle squeeze and the legend of Hauptmann Elias Roth would end. Mission accomplished. Another kill to add to his tally. But something held him back. You sure this is the shot you want to take? Lou's question carried the weight of every life Jack had ever ended from a distance. Through his scope, Jack studied Roth's face. The German wasn't wearing the cold mask of a killer or the fanatic's grimace of a dying regime's last defender. His expression was peaceful, almost serene. The look of a man who had found his answer long ago and was waiting to see if his student would find the same truth. The journal pressed against Jack's chest, and in that moment, all of Roth's philosophical musings crystallized into a single, burning question. What makes a perfect shot worth taking? He's giving you a choice. Lou's voice gentled. The same choice he made when he lost everything. Become death incarnate or... Jack's rifle lowered almost of its own accord. The motion felt like moving through deep water, every instinct screaming against it. But as his scope dropped away from Roth's chest, he felt something else. The weight of countless kills lifting slightly like a breath held too long finally released. Through the broken window, Roth remained motionless. But his eyes, Jack could see them clearly now without the scope's interference, held something that might have been pride or relief. The German's head dipped in a slight nod, an acknowledgement, between masters that transcended language. Then, with the same liquid grace that had marked his every movement, Roth simply vanished. No dramatic exit, no final gesture. Just the empty window frame and the whispered echo of a choice made. He could still kill you, Lou warned. Perfect shot, you standing there exposed. No, Jack whispered, understanding flowing through him like sunlight after rain. That's not what this was about, never was. He remained still, rifle pointed at the ground, waiting, but no shot came. No bullet to punish him for his moment of humanity. Instead, there was only the hollow silence of the ruins, and the growing certainty that he had just passed a test he hadn't known he was taking. Harder than taking the shot, isn't it? Lou's voice held a gentle understanding. Standing there, choosing not to kill. It was. Every muscle in Jack's body trembled with the effort of not raising his rifle, not falling back into the comfortable patterns of seek, sight, squeeze. He had been trained to kill, honed into a perfect instrument of death. But Roth had shown him something else, the courage it took to hold that power and choose not to use it. The true test of a sniper, Jack quoted from Roth's journal, the words holding new meaning now, is not in who he kills, but in who he chooses to spare. The sun emerged from behind a cloud, flooding the ruins with harsh light. In that illumination, Jack saw their battlefield for what it really was. Not just broken buildings and firing positions, but a temple where two priests of death had performed their final ritual. And like all true rituals, its power lay not in the blood spilled, but in the wisdom gained. So what now? Lou asked, his voice carrying both pride and uncertainty. Jack slung his rifle, feeling its weight differently now. It was still a tool of death, but perhaps it could be something more. A reminder of the choice he had made, the day he faced himself in an enemy's scope and chose to lower his sights. Now, he said softly, we see if I'm strong enough to walk away. He turned his back on the empty window, each step an act of faith. Somewhere in the ruins, a legend watched him go, and in that watching was the only approval Jack had ever needed. The war would go on. More shots would be fired. More lives ended from impossible distances. But something had changed in the calculus of death. A perfect shot had been lined up, considered, and deliberately not taken. And in that choice lay a different kind of victory. Jack's boots crunched softly on broken glass as he made his way through the ruins, each step carrying him further from the battlefield of their private war. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the enormous weight of the shot not taken. Behind him, only silence followed. He's really letting you walk away. Lou's voice held a note of wonder. After all that, the sound of approaching boots interrupted the thought. Multiple sets moving with the coordinated rhythm of trained soldiers. Allied soldiers. Jack recognized the cadence of American infantry on patrol. They were sweeping the area, clearing buildings as they advanced. He should have felt relief. The cavalry arriving, backup coming to help finish his mission. Instead, a cold knot formed in his stomach, because he knew, with the same certainty that had guided his finest shots, what Roth would do next. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the morning silence. Jack spun, dropping into a crouch, but no bullet found him. Instead, he watched as an American soldier stumbled backward, clutching his arm. Wounded but not killed. A warning shot. From Roth. He's drawing their fire. Lou's voice came with sudden understanding. But why? Then Jack saw him. Roth stood in the center of the street, rifle held loosely at his side. The morning sun caught him in profile, painting him in stark relief against the ruins. He looked peaceful, like a man who had finally found what he was looking for. Their eyes met across the distance. In that moment, Jack saw everything, the weight of loss that had driven Roth to this place, the careful planning that had brought them together, the final lesson he had waited to teach. This wasn't just an ending. It was an execution, carefully staged by its own victim. "Take cover," an American voice shouted. Rifles were raising, taking aim at the exposed target Roth presented. Jack could have called out, could have identified, himself could have done something to stop what was coming. But he understood now. This was how Roth had planned it all along. The German's slight nod confirmed it, a final acknowledgement between masters. The rifles opened up, their chorus drowning out the single shot that might have been Roth's last reply. The German sniper's body jerked with the impacts, but his face never lost that expression of perfect calm. He fell like a dancer completing a final bow, each movement precise even in death. "Jesus," Lou whispered. He wanted this. Set it up perfect, right to the end. Jack remained motionless as American soldiers rushed forward to secure the area. They moved past him without a second, glance focused on the fallen enemy sniper. None of them understood what they had just witnessed. How could they? They hadn't seen the artistry of Roth's final performance, the deliberate way he had orchestrated his own end. "Staff Sergeant?" One of the soldiers finally noticed him. "You okay? We heard there was a German sniper in the area." "There was," Jack replied softly, his eyes still on Roth's still form. "But he's gone now." The soldiers efficiently checked Roth's body, collecting his weapons and documents. One of them whistled softly. "Hey, look at this. Some kind of journal. All in German, but—" "Leave it," Jack commanded, surprising himself with the authority in his voice. "Leave him his book." The soldier hesitated, then shrugged and stepped back. They had bigger concerns than a dead sniper's diary. The war was still moving forward, sweeping through the ruins like a tide erasing footprints from sand. Jack touched the journal pressed against his chest, Roth's gift to him, his share of their deadly communion. The German had known exactly how this would end, had planned it with the same precision he brought to every shot. He hadn't just chosen his death, he had turned it into his final lesson. "The perfect shot," Jack murmured, understanding at last, "isn't always the one you take." He turned away as medics arrived to deal with Roth's body. The war would record this as just another enemy sniper eliminated, another obstacle cleared from the Allied advance. They wouldn't understand that something profound had happened here. A transfer of wisdom paid for in blood, a truth about death and choice passed from master to student. Lou's voice came one last time, gentle with understanding. "Some teachers show you how to live. He showed you how to die." Jack walked away from the scene, leaving Roth to the tender mercies of military burial details. But he carried something with him, not just the journal, but the weight of a choice. The knowledge that even in war, even with a perfect shot lined up, there was always a moment of decision. Roth had given him that, had died to prove it. The morning sun continued to climb, indifferent to the drama it had illuminated. In its light, Jack saw his shadow stretching ahead of him, longer now somehow. Changed, just as Roth had intended. The walk back to the Allied camp felt longer than it should have. Each step carried Jack further from the ruins where he'd faced not just Roth, but himself. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the churned earth, and somewhere in those shadows Jack could still see the German sniper's final bow. "They won't understand," Lou's voice came softly. How could they? They weren't there. The camp materialized through the haze like a different world. Men cleaning weapons, sharing cigarettes, living the ordinary moments between battles. Their faces were familiar but somehow foreign now, as if Jack had returned from a journey to some distant country they couldn't imagine. Lieutenant Carter's command tent stood at the center of the organized chaos, its canvas walls rippling in, the spring breeze. Jack paused outside, suddenly aware of the weight of Roth's journal against his chest. How could he explain what had happened in language the military would understand? Staff Sergeant Whitaker. Carter looked up from his maps as Jack entered, his expression neutral. Report. Jack stood at attention, his posture perfect, while his mind raced through everything that had happened. The deadly dance through the ruins, the philosophical messages in bullet holes, the moment of choice when he'd lowered his rifle, Roth's final performance. Target eliminated, sir, he heard himself say, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Carter made a small mark on his paper, just another item checked off an endless list. Confirmed kill? Jack's hands wanted to shake, but he held them still. It's over, sir. The lieutenant nodded absently, already focused on his next problem. Good work. Get some rest. We'll need you for the push into... Sir, Jack interrupted, surprising himself. The German sniper. He was Hauptmann Elias Roth. That got Carter's attention. He looked up sharply. Roth? The Olympic shooter? A frown crossed his face. That's quite a coup, Sergeant. I'll make sure it's noted in the report. And just like that, it was done. A legend reduced to a line in a report, filed and forgotten. No mention of the art in his killing, the philosophy in his dying. For a moment, just a moment, he could have sworn he saw Roth standing behind the soldier, hands ghosting over the rifle's familiar lines, eyes meeting Jack's across the impossible distance. You're seeing things, Lou warned. War can do that to a man. Make him see meanings where there's just coincidence. Maybe. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than coincidence. The fog, the perfect firing position, Roth's rifle appearing like a message from beyond. It felt staged, choreographed, like one of Roth's elaborate lessons. The German soldier settled into position, unwittingly presenting Jack with a perfect shot. Clean, clear textbook, the kind of shot that had once been automatic. Jack's finger rested on the trigger, but didn't squeeze. In his mind, Roth's voice seemed to whisper from the pages of his journal. Every shot not taken is also a choice, perhaps the most important choice of all. They won't understand if you don't take it, Lou said softly. Command wants that officer dead. That's why you're here. But Jack wasn't really here, was he? Part of him was still in those ruins with Roth, learning the deeper truths about their craft, about what it meant to hold death in your hands and consciously choose whether to release it. His rifle lowered slowly, deliberately. Below, the German soldier remained unaware of how close he had come to death, or how much the ghost of his rifle's previous owner had just saved his life. So that's it? Lou asked. You're really doing this? Jack packed up his position with the same careful precision he'd used to set it up. This shot isn't worth taking, he said quietly. Not for this. Not without meaning. He could already imagine Lieutenant Carter's reaction. The questions, the suspicion, the growing concern about his reliability. The war machine had no place for snipers who questioned their shots, who saw ghosts in the fog and meaning in coincidence. But as Jack made his way back through the ruins, Roth's journal pressed against his heart, he realized something. He couldn't go back to being what he was. The perfect automaton, dealing death without question or hesitation. Roth's final lesson had changed something fundamental in him. They'll probably pull you from sniper duty, Lou warned, if you keep this up. Maybe, Jack agreed, touching the journal through his jacket. But better that than becoming what he warned me about, a perfect killer without a perfect reason. The fog began to lift, taking its ghosts with it. But Jack knew he would see Roth again, in every scope, every perfect shot, every moment of choice between dealing death and granting life. Some teachers never stop teaching even after they're gone. The paperwork was clean, efficient, just like everything else in the military. A transfer to support duties coded in language that carefully avoided any suggestion of failure or inability. But Jack knew what it meant. He'd seen it happen to other snipers. The ones who started hesitating, started seeing their targets as men instead of silhouettes. Could be worse, Lou's voice offered as Jack packed his gear. They could have court-martialed you for failing to take the shot. Lieutenant Carter had been almost kind about it in his way. No direct accusations, no uncomfortable questions about Jack's encounter with Roth. Just a quiet conversation about combat fatigue and temporary reassignment. They both knew it wasn't temporary. Through the command tent's open flap, Jack watched a group of fresh-faced snipers heading out for their morning briefing. Their rifles gleamed with eager care, their movements sharp with untested confidence. Had he ever been that young, that certain? "You were better," Lou said, reading his thoughts. "Just didn't know the cost yet." Jack's fingers brushed Roth's journal tucked safely in his jacket. The pages were becoming worn from constant reading, the German sniper's philosophical musings mixing with Jack's own troubled thoughts. One passage had been particularly haunting him lately. The perfect shot is not measured in accuracy, but in necessity, in the weight of its meaning. The sound of approaching footsteps made him turn, soft steps, civilian shoes instead of military boots. Ing stood in the tent's entrance, somehow looking both older and younger than when he'd last seen her in the ruins. Her eyes held the same ancient wisdom, but there was something else there now. Something like peace. "You're leaving," she said. Not a question. Jack nodded, gesturing at his packed gear. "They need me elsewhere, away from—" He didn't finish. The thought. Away from the killing. Ing stepped into the tent, her presence somehow making the military space feel different, more human. He knew this would happen, if you understood. Roth? The name still felt strange on Jack's tongue. He knew I'd fail? Fail? A slight smile touched Inga's lips. Just another dead German, clearing the way for victory. "Dismissed," Carter said, already turning back to his maps. Jack found himself in his tent without quite remembering the walk there. His hands moved automatically, breaking down his rifle, for cleaning. Each piece he removed felt heavier than normal, weighted with new meaning. "You okay, Jackie?" Lou's voice held genuine concern. "They're going to keep sending me out," Jack said softly, oilcloth moving in practiced patterns across steel. "Keep asking me to kill, like nothing's changed." But everything had changed. Every shot he took from now on would carry the weight of choice, the burden of understanding exactly what he was destroying. Roth had given him that gift, or curse, with his final lesson. He pulled out the German's journal, its pages still warm from being pressed against his chest. Opening it randomly, his eyes fell on a passage underlined in precise ink. The fate. Perfect sniper does not shoot to kill. He shoots to illuminate the darkness in men's souls, including his own. "Deep stuff," Lou commented. "But what does it mean for you now?" Before Jack could answer, a shadow fell across his tent entrance. Another runner, another message, another mission. "Staff Sergeant, Lieutenant Carter needs you. German counterattack forming up 2 miles east. They need you in position before sunset." Jack looked at his disassembled rifle, each piece laid out with mechanical precision. Then, at Roth's journal, its pages filled with deadly wisdom. The war wasn't going to give him time to process what had happened. It needed its instruments of death to keep playing their lethal music. "Tell him I'll be ready," Jack said, his voice steady even as uncertainty churned inside him. The runner disappeared, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts and his weapons. He resumed cleaning his rifle, each motion a meditation on what he had learned in the ruins. Roth was dead, but his lessons lived on. In the journal, in Jack's memories, in the weight of every trigger pull to come. "So what now?" Lou asked, quietly. "How do you keep being what they need you to be, knowing what you know?" Jack chambered around, the sound sharp and final in the tent's confined space. "One shot at a time," he replied. "But each one has to mean something now, has to be worth taking." Outside, the war machine ground forward, indifferent to the philosophical struggles of its parts. But inside his tent, Jack Whitaker, student of Roth's final lesson, prepared to go back into position, carrying a new burden. The burden of knowing exactly what it meant to deal death from a distance. The new position was perfect, a half-collapsed office building overlooking a strategic crossroads. Jack went through the motions of setting up with mechanical precision, each movement automatic after countless missions. But something was different. He felt it in his bones, in the way his hands moved just a fraction slower than before, in how each breath seemed to carry the weight of new understanding. "You're thinking too much," Lou's voice commented. "Used to be, you'd be zeroed in by now." He was right. Before Roth, before the lessons written in bullet holes in philosophical journals, Jack would have already been scanning for targets, calculating wind speeds, mentally mapping lines of fire. Now, each action felt heavy with meaning, laden with choices he'd never considered before. The morning fog clung to the ruins like a shroud, turning familiar shapes into ghostly suggestions. Through his scope, Jack watched the intersection where intelligence said a German officer would pass. A high-value target, Lieutenant Carter had emphasized. The kind of mission that had once filled Jack with cold pride. Movement. Jack's body responded automatically, scope tracking the shape emerging from the mist. A German soldier, moving with the careful precision of someone who knew he was in a killing zone. But something about him made Jack's breath catch in his throat. The rifle. Even through the fog, even at this distance, Jack recognized it instantly. The distinctive profile of a modified Carabiner 98K, customized with the same precise attention to detail that had marked everything about its former owner. Roth's rifle. "That's impossible," Jack whispered, but he knew what he was seeing. The German army wasn't sentimental about equipment. Roth's weapon would have been collected, cleaned, and reassigned. Just another tool in the war machine's endless hunger. "Fitting, isn't it?" Lou's voice was thoughtful. "Nothing goes to waste. Not guns, not bullets, not men." The soldier moved like any other, competent but unremarkable. Nothing like Roth's liquid grace, his artistic precision. Just another young man with a dead man's rifle, unaware of the history he carried in his hands. But as Jack watched through his scope, something strange happened. The fog seemed to shift, to take on shape and substance. "Is that what you think this is?" Before Jack could respond, noise outside drew their attention. The young snipers were heading out, their excited chatter carrying through the canvas walls. One voice rose above the others. "I heard Thompson got 3 yesterday. Clean shots, long range, betting I can beat that by sunset." Jack felt something twist in his chest. Not envy, but a deep, aching sadness. He remembered being like that, counting kills like points in a game, before Roth had shown him the true weight of what they did. "You were right not to kill him," Inga said softly, her words carrying the weight of absolution. "In the end, that's what made you worthy of his lesson." "What lesson?" Jack asked, though part of him already knew. That the best soldiers aren't the ones who kill without thinking. She touched Roth's journal gently. "They're the ones who understand exactly what it means to take a life and choose not to, when they can." The tent fell silent, the young snipers' voices fading into distance. Jack looked at his own rifle, cleaned and packed away. It felt like saying goodbye to a part of himself, but not the part he'd expected. "I'm not a soldier anymore," he said, testing the words. "No," Ing agreed. "You're something harder to be. Someone who sees the truth about war and still chooses to serve. Just differently." She turned to go, but paused at the tent's entrance. "Roth told me once that every sniper faces a moment of choice, not about whether they can kill, but about whether they can stop. Most never do." "But I did," Jack said softly. "Yes." Her smile was sad but proud. "And that's why he chose you. Why he died to show you the way." She disappeared into the morning light, leaving Jack alone with his packed gear and his thoughts. Outside, the war machine ground on, processing men and materials through its endless gears. But for the first time since he'd entered the service, Jack felt like he could see it clearly, not as a participant, but as a witness. "So what now?" Lou's voice asked gently. Jack touched the journal one last time, feeling its weight like a talisman. "Now we serve differently. We remember. We understand." He shouldered his pack, leaving his sniper rifle to be reassigned to younger, more certain hands. His war wasn't over, not really. But it had changed, transformed by a German sniper's final lesson about the true meaning of perfect shots and perfect choices. The morning sun cast his shadow long across the tent floor. It looked different now, softer somehow, more human. Just as Roth had intended. Dawn was just breaking when Jack slipped away from the evacuation camp, making his way back through the ruins one last time. The city looked different now. The front had moved on, leaving behind a strange stillness that felt almost sacred. His papers were processed, his transport home scheduled for that afternoon. But he couldn't leave, not yet. Not without saying goodbye. "You sure about this?" Lou's voice carried a note of concern. "Some things are better left buried." But Jack knew better. Everything Roth had taught him, every message left in bullet holes and journal pages had led to this moment. This final pilgrimage to understand. The battlefield where Roth had made his last stand was quiet now, the sounds of war replaced by morning birdsong. Nature was already beginning to reclaim the ruins, small plants pushing through cracks in the concrete. Jack moved through the familiar terrain with a sniper's stealth, but this time he wasn't hunting. He was remembering. He found the spot easily enough, the place where Roth had chosen to end his war. The German's body was long gone, processed through the efficient machinery of military death. But something remained, something that made Jack's breath catch in his throat. There in the center of where Roth had fallen stood a single bullet, upright, perfectly balanced, just like the messages the German sniper had left throughout their deadly game. But this one was different. This one hadn't been left by Roth. "Ing," Jack whispered, understanding flowing through him. She had come here too, paying her own respects to the man who had protected her, taught her, shown her a different kind of strength. The bullet caught the morning light, its brass surface marked with the same precise craftsmanship that had characterized everything about Roth. Jack knelt beside it, studying the way it had been placed, not just standing but oriented exactly along the line of Roth's final shot. The one that had wounded but not killed, that had drawn the attention that ended his life. He really planned everything, Lou mused, right down to how he would die. Jack reached out slowly, his fingers hovering over the bullet. In that moment, all of Roth's lessons seemed to crystallize into a single burning truth. The perfect shot wasn't about death at all. It was about understanding exactly what death meant, and choosing it, or not, with full awareness of its weight. He picked up the bullet carefully, feeling its warmth from the morning sun. This was Roth's final message, left not by him, but for him. A reminder that every bullet carried not just death but choice, meaning, purpose. "You never wanted to kill me," Jack said softly to the empty air. "You wanted me to understand why you had to die." The ruins held their silence, but Jack felt something shift inside him, a weight lifting replaced by a different kind of burden. The burden of knowing, of understanding, of carrying forward what Roth had died to teach. From his jacket, he pulled out Roth's journal, its pages dog-eared and worn from constant reading. He opened it to a blank page near the back and placed the bullet carefully between the leaves. It fit perfectly, as if the book had been waiting for this final entry. "Taking a souvenir?" Lou asked. "No," Jack replied, closing the journal gently. "Taking a reminder of what it means to hold death in your hands and choose life instead." The morning sun climbed higher, throwing long shadows across the battlefield where two masters of death had faced each other and found something else entirely. Jack stood, tucking the journal away close to his heart. His transport would be leaving soon, carrying him away from this city of ruins and revelations. But as he turned to go, something made him pause. The light had shifted, casting his shadow back toward where Roth had fallen. For a moment, Just a moment. It looked like two shadows stood there, his own, and another, straighter one. A teacher's shadow, falling across his student's path one last time. "Goodbye," Jack whispered, both to Roth and to the man he himself had been before their deadly dance began. He walked away from the ruins, leaving behind the echoes of shots, not taken and choices finally understood. The war had changed him, but not in the way anyone could have predicted. He had gone in a perfect killer and come out something else, something that Roth had seen in him all along. A man who understood the true weight of death and chose to carry it differently. The morning light filtered through Jack's study window, catching the silver in his hair as he studied his reflection. 20 years had passed since the war, since his dance of death with Roth in those ruined streets. The face in the mirror was different now, softer, the sharp edges of the soldier worn smooth by time and understanding. "Looking philosophical this morning," Lou's voice came, familiar, as ever. The ghost of his spotter had never left him, though their conversations had changed over the years. Jack opened the bottom drawer of his desk, removing a small wooden box carved with precise geometric patterns. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, lay two objects. Roth's journal, its pages yellow with age but still intact, and the bullet Inga had left as a final message. His fingers traced the bullet's surface, feeling the slight imperfections that made it unique. Like the men who had carried it, who had understood its weight, it was both perfect and flawed. An instrument of death transformed into a testament of choice. "Remember how simple it used to be?" Lou asked softly. "Just find the target, calculate the shot, squeeze the trigger." Jack did remember, but those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now, a younger man who hadn't yet learned what Roth had died to teach him. He opened the journal to a random page, the German sniper's precise handwriting still clear after all these years. "The true victory in war is not in surviving, but in choosing who we become when the shooting stops." He had lived those words in the decades since leaving the battlefield, had built a life around understanding rather than killing, around choices rather than orders. The nightmares had never completely gone away, but they had changed. Now when he dreamed of Roth, it wasn't about their deadly game of cat and mouse. It was about that moment of choice when he had lowered his rifle and chosen to see the man instead of the target. The bullet caught the morning light as Jack turned it in his fingers. For years he had kept it close, a reminder of lessons learned in blood and wisdom. But today, something felt different. Complete, somehow. "You're smiling," Lou observed. "First time I've seen that when you're holding it." He was right. A slight smile had touched Jack's lips, unexpected but genuine, because for the first time he truly understood what Roth had been trying to tell him all along. The perfect shot wasn't about hitting the target, it was about knowing when not to take the shot at all. Jack placed the bullet on his desk, letting it stand upright one last time. Beside it, he opened Roth's journal to its final blank pages. With careful strokes, he began to write, "To the man who taught me that the heaviest weight a soldier carries is not his rifle, but his choices. And to the memory of a perfect shot, never taken." "Finally writing your own philosophy?" Lou asked. "Finally understanding it," Jack replied softly. He stood, leaving the bullet and journal on his desk. Outside his window, spring was painting the world in colors no battlefield had ever known. The war felt distant now, its echoes softened by time and reflection. But its lessons remained, carved into his soul by a German sniper who had seen something in him worth saving. "You know what Roth would say about all this?" Lou's voice carried a smile of its own. "That the true test of a warrior isn't in how well he fights," Jack answered, "but in how well he lives with the choices he's made." He stepped outside into the morning air, breathing deeply. The weight of his past felt different now, not lighter exactly, but better balanced. He had carried Roth's final message for 20 years, letting it shape him into something neither of them could have imagined in those war-torn ruins. Not a perfect soldier, not a perfect killer, just a man who had learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the bravest thing a warrior can do is choose not to fight. The bullet would remain on his desk, untouched. A reminder not of death, but of life, of choices made and wisdom earned, of a German sniper who had staged his own death to teach one American soldier the true meaning of victory. And somewhere, in whatever place old soldiers go when the fighting's done, Jack liked to think Roth was smiling too, because his final shot, the one that had never been fired, had hit its target perfectly. The end. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.